Ways stories move forward. This lesson is about understanding why stories move and why they sometimes fail to move. Conflict is the force that keeps a story alive. Without it, nothing meaningful happens. This lesson sets the foundation for everything else in storytelling because plot, character, and structure all depend on conflict to function. Reason stories becomes boring. Most stories do not fail because of poor grammar or weak vocabulary. They fail because nothing changes. When a character remains comfortable and unchallenged, the reader has no reason to keep reading. A story becomes boring the moment it stops moving. Conflict is what creates that movement. So here, story feels boring when nothing changes. So make sure that your story always changes so that readers can acquaint themselves with the story. And then don't think about beauty. Beautiful writing cannot replace movement. And readers stay for pleasure. Readers stay for pressure and not comfort. So give your story a challenge. Give it a challenge so that it doesn't become boring. Give it some suspense in the story so that it moves the readers. So know here that without conflict, there is no story. It must exist for the story to progress. So conflict is not about fighting, but rather you are giving opposition to the character. Okay, so always remember that there should be some resistance in your conflict so that it moves the story, and also it must stand between a character and what they really want. So make sure that you intentionally create pressure for your character so that readers can always come back to read whatever you've put out there or continue to read your work. So as we've looked at what conflict really is, now we are turning our focus on what conflict is not. And it is very important to note this so that you make your work more lovely. Okay, so here many writers assume that conflict means fighting or shouting. That is a misunderstanding. Conflict can exist quietly. A character hesitating before making a choice is already in conflict. And conflict is not about chaos. Conflict is not about chaos. It is controlled pressure that forces action. So here, all that I'm saying is not constant violence. So know that conflict is not about constant violence. Neither is it shouting or argument, or it is not a chaos for its own sake. So conflict can be very quiet. It can also be eternal or a subtle way. So when you are creating conflict in your story, always don't assume that it's all about fighting. It's all about fighting or shouting. No, it can be quiet. It can be subtle or internal. Okay. We said that how to move your story forward. So here, know that it is the conflict that will move your story. So here, conflict creates story movement. And how does it move? How does it move, or how does it create the story to move? Stories move forward because characters are pushed forward. Conflict provides that push. It creates agency and direction. When resistance appears, the character must respond. That response moves the story into its next moment. So, conflict is the engineer of the story. Assume that you have a car. Without the engine, the car cannot move. The car or the vehicle will be stagnant. It will not move. So when you are creating, always use a car as an example, that if you want your story to move forward, what does that story need? Or what ingredient must you put in the story to create a movement? Okay, so bear in mind that conflict always pushes the character forward. It also creates agency and direction, and it also keeps your reader asking themselves, what next? What next? So keep that in mind. So as we move forward, something should spark your story, or something should spark the plot and the conflict. And here it can be a challenge that you are giving to the character or the story. Okay, so every story begins with a challenge. And a challenge is an event that disrupts normal life. It does not have to be dramatic, but it must demand attention. It is the moment when the character can no longer continue as before. So without a challenge, there is no story, but only a routine. But only a routine. So here, the challenge is rather launching the story to move forward. And it could be that a bad news, it could be a bad news or an unexpected opportunity or a sudden loss of a relative or a loved one or a sudden loss of something valuable that you cherish so much, or a very dangerous encounter that you have faced or you've come across. So these things should spark the challenge. This thing should spark the challenge. So it is called the first spark. That is the challenge. The challenge is the first spark. So don't make your conflict or your plot or your story flat. Make sure that you give it a challenge, because as human beings as we are, we always face challenges in our life in one way or the other, either from outside or from within. So now ask yourself, what does challenge does, or what does it create? Challenges always create a desire for something, a desire for a solution. Okay, so once challenge appears, the character always wants something. And what is that something? Desire is born from disruption. The character may want safety. Okay, so what does that desire, what does that character want? What he wants is safety, an answer, or a revenge, or to escape from a certain situation or a dangerous situation he or she finds himself. It could also be success, that the character is looking for success. Okay, so desire gives the story a direction. It will give your story a direction. A story without desire, it always wanders around. It wanders around without an end or without a focus point. Okay, so bear in mind that challenges will always create a desire for your character to look for something, to look for a situation, or to look for certain things that is not there. Okay, so make sure you always remember this and move your story forward. So in summary, and at this point, Story begins when wanting begins. Stories begins when wanting begins. In life, we all have goals that we set for ourselves. Okay, so goals give the story a shape. So your story should have a goal. Your story should have a goal, or the character must have a goal. And that is, desire becomes a goal. So now, after you have created, the challenges has created the desire tends to become a goal. As we said that the character wants something. And what is that something? That something we said under challenge create desire, that your character may want safety. So maybe that might be, or that is the goal of the character, okay, to have safety. So desires becomes a goal when the character decides to pursue it until he or she attains to that height. He won't stop. He or she won't give up. He or she will continue. So the goal gives the story structure. It defines what success and failure means. And without a clear goal, conflict loses its power because the reader does not know what is at stake. So make sure that your reader, you keep the readers in mind, okay, so that they follow the story to the end. So the goal here is to drive the plot. The goal here is to drive the plot. So kindly put that in mind when you are creating a conflict for your story or for your character. So conflict begins when the path is blocked. Conflict truly begins when the character's path to the goal is blocked. If a character wants something and gets it easy, the story ends immediately. Obstacles are necessary because they force effort, creativity, and struggle. So what is standing in the way of the goal? You need to find it and then put it in the story, okay? And then progress becomes difficult. You know, as we are, as corporate individuals, as we are climbing up, you face challenges. At times there are hills, and then there are valleys for you to go through. And this is where the conflict begins, to start or to end, to go ahead or to stop. So this is how conflict begins, when the path is blocked, and then where struggles also begin. So if nothing resists the goal, the story collapses. So something should resist your goal. Something should resist your goal. So don't make it sound like the story has no difficulties or challenges, or all things is perfect in the story. Try as much as possible to make the story face resistance, okay, so that your story won't collapse. Conflict is a series and not just one event. Strong stories do not rely on one obstacle. They use many. Each obstacle should increase difficulty or cost. Conflict works best when it keeps returning in new form, forcing the character to adapt and grow. So conflict should keep returning. As I said, it is not a one-off series, but it should be consistent, okay? It shouldn't be a one-off event. It should keep coming. it should keep coming. So obstacle comes one after the other. Use yourself as an example. A challenge came once upon a time in your life. It has not stopped. You solve and another challenge come or another conflict come. You keep solving them. So this is where you have to inculcate it or incorporate it in your story. Okay, so your story has become a living being. Your story has become a living being, so you should face conflict and challenges. Create that incidents or create that series for it, okay? And each one should raise pressure. Each one should raise pressure. The second conflict shouldn't be at the same level of the previous one. You should upscale it. You should upscale the pressure. And each one needs a response. You must give a response to any conflict you create. Conflict should keep returning. Make sure your conflict in the story keeps returning. Determination under pressure. Conflict tests how badly a character wants their goal. Pressure reveals commitment. Some characters retreat, others persist. The reader becomes invested when they see a character struggle and continue despite resistance. So the pressure must reveal who the character is. Okay, so you need to give pressure to your character. Your character should face pressure. In the spheres of life, there are formulas, okay, and the core story formula is the basic engine of storytelling. It's simple. Challenge leads to decision. Decision leads to action. So this cycle repeats throughout the story. Every meaningful scene should follow this pattern. When it breaks, the story slows or stops. So this is a cycle to use or a formula to use when you are telling a story. So that is another engine of a storytelling, and it is very simple. So the challenge faces the challenge will force a choice. And the decision should lead to action, and action should create a new challenge, as we said a while ago, that the conflict should not be a one event, but a series. So this is the formula to use. When challenge forces a choice, a decision leads to an action, and that action must create a new challenge for the story or for your character. So it is the cycle. So this cycle drives every story strong. This cycle drives every story strong. So the importance of decision. The importance of decision. Decisions are the turning point of a story. A challenge without a decision is meaningless. A decision without action is empty. When a character chooses and acts, the story changes direction. That change is what keeps readers engaged. Because when you go back to the core formula, the core story formula, we said that we move from challenge, decision, and action creates a new challenge. So here, that decision is the turning point of every story. So Stories move when characters choose. Story move when characters characters choose. So no decision means no movement. And avoidance also kills momentum. Choice make a scene turn. So internal conflict must count here. Internal conflict must count here. So some of the strongest conflicts are internal. That is fear, doubt, guilt, and belief can block a character just as effectively as an enemy. Internal conflict internal conflict deepens the story and makes character feel real and human. Search through yourself as a human being that you have your own weaknesses, you have your doubts, you have your fears. So these are internal conflict that challenges you every day in life. Every day in life. So the deepest battle often happens within. So your story must also face the same. Must also face the same. And conflicting will always create a desire for your readers to stick. As we have internal conflict, we also have external conflict, and that also counts in every story or a character you are developing. So it provides visible struggles. It can come from people, society, nature, or system. Internal conflict often mirrors internal conflict, forcing the character to face their inner struggles through outward action. So it could be person to person, nature to person, or person to nature and society and other stuff. So both inner and outer conflicts strengthen stories. So make sure that the story you are creating involves internal and external conflicts. Every scene must contain conflict. A scene should challenge the character in some way. If a scene does not force a choice or create change, it does not move the story forward and should be questioned. So every scene should answer the following: what does the character want here? What blocks them? What decision is forced? What action follows? So scene must change something. The scene must change something. Okay. Escalation is essential. So as we are looking at conflict employed in your story, the conflicts must grow. Obstacles should become harder. Stakes should rise. Early conflict tests ability. Later conflict tests identity. Escalation keeps the story from feeling repetitive or predictable. So easy victories weaken a story. So conflict should intensify, raise the stakes high, and make sure that failures cause more over time. Why writers must be ruthless? Writers often hesitate to hurt their character, but struggle is necessary. Characters become meaningful only when tested. Protecting characters too much weakens the story and reduce emotional impact. So in order not to reduce the emotional impact and not to protect the character to weaken it, you must make sure that the story is always struggling. Strong stories demand what? Struggle. So protecting the creates struggles, creates transformation, and growth requires. Conflict is what keeps a story alive. When characters face resistance, make choices, and act under pressure, stories move forward. In the next lesson, we will explore how conflict doesn't just move the plot, it changes the character. See you in the next class.